My thought was that we should start with a flag state, Ollie, because I would assume you've had quite a busy year with plenty of lessons learned.
Yes. Good morning. And from a flag state perspective, I can start. The pandemic sets in, and in late February 2020, it became obvious to the BMA that COVID-19 was going to have an effect on shipping industry and seafarers. To meet the upcoming challenges, BMA issued a technical alert where obvious issues that might arise during the crisis were addressed. This all happened prior to the lockdown in Western Europe. The main topics from a manning perspective were the possibility that the validity of seafarers' employment agreements might have to be extended beyond 12 months due to travel restrictions in different countries, extension of validity of STCW certificates, extension of validity of medical certificates. The guidance provided in the technical alert was well received, and other flag states followed and issued their own guidance, which basically concurred. So at least there was some kind of cooperation there. The announcement from the UN and the UN organs. Some weeks later, UN, IMO, ILO, and WHO issued a joint statement which was signed by the respective Secretaries General, where seafarers were classed as essential workers, and countries were asked to treat seafarers as essential workers. The statement was respected by some countries, but other countries still do not consider seafarers to be essential workers and have no or very restrictive arrangements in place for repatriation. If a ship trades in an area where those restrictions are in place, the seafarers may come under a force majeure to extend the seafarers' employment agreements several months beyond the 12 months that are stipulated in MLC. In the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, when the cruise liner stopped operation, many 10,000 seafarers got stuck on board due to travel restrictions all around the world. There were also several seafarers who asked companies to remain on board to mitigate risk of being infected with COVID, although they had the opportunity to travel home. BMA was contacted by companies on how to deal with the issues. Solutions were found between the seafarers and the companies that the Bahamas could accept. Abandoned crews. Immediately after the lockdown, the crews on a couple of ships were abandoned. The cases were resolved upon substantial effort where BMA was involved. The seafarers were eventually repatriated and received their salaries. In June, 5 Bahamas cruise liners were detained because the company had failed to follow the guidance on extending the seafarers' employment agreements as provided in the technical alert. The seafarers were not abandoned at that stage. However, it became evident that the company was about to run into financial problems. In July, the company went into administrations and more than 1,600 seafarers were abandoned. Bahamas had already intervened in June, so the case was known. After the company had filed for administration, discussions were initiated with the P&I Club, who eventually agreed to pay the outstanding wages and for the repatriation of the seafarers as stipulated in MLC. The repatriation went smoothly, well assisted by ADF and the Boer state. And the Seafarers Crisis Action Team. IMO established the Seafarers Crisis Action Team, SCAT, I'll call it, to assist seafarers, particularly with repatriation and health issues. However, there is a wider perspective since seafarers may be abandoned and have not received their wages. Bahamas cooperates with the SCAT, which has been expanded to include ILO and ITF now. Bahamas also uses diplomatic channels to assist with repatriation of seafarers. And to add, SCAT is active in an abandonment case now, which came up late last week after I prepared this. But that's not a Bahamas flagship to say that, or to be informed that the Bahamas got asked. So, and then we have the resolutions. Resolutions have been agreed in ILO at the special tripartite meeting in April. this year, and in the IMO at the Maritime Safety Committee in May. The resolution states that seafarers should not be quarantined or otherwise restricted when traveling to or from the ships unless they're tested COVID positive. However, heavy travel restrictions persist in Southeast Asia and Australia, and seafarers are not exempted, which makes repatriation in that part of the world next to impossible, if not impossible, and it is impossible in some of the countries. And then the assessment, the opportunities. The internet communication technology infrastructure has proved to work well during the pandemic and has proved that full remote operation of ships is possible from a flag state perspective by utilizing ICT. A good ICT infrastructure is essential, also at employees' homes, just to state that. I'm referring to speed and things like that and stability. The international institutions, IMO, ILO, WHO, and the UN, need to set up a scheme and generate either a code or a convention with the following requirements in place. A contingency should be in place for similar situations that will consider seafarers as essential workers, which provides seafarers with the rights to travel to and from ships without restrictions. If during a pandemic seafarers are tested positive, port states shall provide necessary medical treatment and keep all parties informed, or all stakeholders informed, and permit the seafarers to travel to his or her home or go back to his or her ship as soon as she is recovered and has no risk that the seafarers are exposed to being infected. Flag states shall intervene and cooperate with port states as required to ensure seafarers are treated fairly in accordance with the Human Rights Convention and other relevant conventions that pertain to seafarers. Seafarers should get priority in the national vaccination programs, right behind frontline healthcare and social workers. And a plan how to ensure we do not hit a breaking point this year, and that is from a Bahamas experience. We should ensure that seafarers are permitted to travel to and from the ships without restrictions unless they are tested COVID positive. Countries that still have travel restrictions in place should remove them. National states of the seafarers should provide priority to seafarers in their vaccination programs. Flag states and port states should actively support the IMO SCAT group, finding solutions when seafarers are exposed to restrictions that prevent them from being repatriated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ollie, from a flag state point of view. And Justyna, the European Commission, it's been a busy year, hasn't it? More than a year, actually.
Yes, that's true. Thank you, Torbjorn. Yeah, that has been a very busy 1 year and a half almost already. And yeah, I just wanted to start by saying that whenever we speak about the COVID pandemic, we're using words like unprecedented, unique, first time, whatever. We have not been prepared. And neither member states nor the European Commission was not prepared for such an event. And the moment when the Director General of WHO declared publicly that we are in the state of a pandemic, the member states used their right to close the border, although one of the fundamental rights of the European Union citizens is the freedom of movement. But of course, there are some limits to that fundamental right, which is that the member states are allowed to put borders again for the reason of public health, and that was the case. So, not more than 1 week ago, after the pandemic has been announced on the 11th of March, the governments of the European Union member states declared that they put temporary restrictions for non-essential travels. And then yet again, we had to establish who are essentials and who are not essentials. So from the very beginning, from the European Commission side, the Directorate for Transport and Mobility, which I'm working for, we were trying to to establish for the all transport workers, including seafarers, a status of an essential workers, which we did through first the communication, so-called Green Lines communication, establishing corridors for transport workers. And first of all, it was dedicated to truck drivers, because they were stuck at the borders with the trucks and with the cargo. But also, of course, we've mentioned that it's very important to facilitate traveling for seafarers. Those are a very kind of an exceptional transport workers, because of the fact that the moment they get on land, they are not transport workers anymore. They are just passengers, because they have to join the ships or they have to go back home. But the transport workers, I mean, the people who are carrying cargoes, they're only on the sea. So this is the special situation of the seafarers we had to face. And of course, the seafarers need to improve the seafarers' identity by different means, not only by the seafarers' ID, but also we recommended member states to accept the many means of proving the identity for seafarers, such as the seafarers working agreement, seafarers identity card, the certificates, the whatever means they can prove the seafarers profession to pass the border. And also to somehow claim for the visa upon arrival, because once the pandemic outbreak happened in many countries, all consulates has been closed, like every institutions. And as many of us could have and still are working remotely, issuing a visa in a remote system mode is quite a challenge. So for those who were not able to obtain the visas in the country of residence or country of departure, and of course we all know that the majority of seafarers working on board of EU flag ships or just joining the ships in the EU ports, they are from non-EU countries also, so they are required to have a Schengen visa. But coming back to the very beginning of the pandemic, as Oli said, one of the main problems, and we were acting, in fact, by addressing emergencies, because we didn't know what to do. We were just facing emergencies like the expiring of HTCW certificates for seafarers, the seafarers employment agreement, the medical certificates, but also the travel documents, as the visas I already mentioned, but also passports and all the documents you may imagine. And they had to stay either on board or they've been just stopped in the country of ports they called to, or they were not even allowed to go back to their country because of the full lockdown and border being closed. So we were trying to facilitate the movement of seafarers as much as we could by, of course, granting the special status of an essential key worker for seafarers within the union, but also allowing them, those who are not living in the union, they're not residents or citizens, coming into the union. But also we tried by diplomatic means to facilitate the movement of seafarers in the non-EU countries. We exactly 1 year ago, in June 2020, we've reached out 35 countries that we have identified as being crucial in the context of the labor offices, asking them for the information about the situation of seafarers, and also underlining the importance to facilitate the seafarers crew changes and seafarers traveling. Now the situation of, and also 1 year ago, we arrived with we reached out a number of 400,000 seafarers being stuck on board, and the equal number of seafarers waiting for going to sign the ship. Now the situation is much better, of course. We have more flights that we didn't have a year ago. We have more possibilities for crew changes. Ports are more open to crew changes, and now what we have to do is to learn from the past. And I think that the first lesson we got is that the most important thing is the cooperation between administration, international organization, and the industry. And I think that we should continue this. And the next step and the big challenge is the vaccination program for seafarers. And I think that the cooperation we got, and that's the only added value from the COVID lesson, we have to continue to vaccinate seafarers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justyna. And yes, we are crossing fingers for vaccination programs, aren't we? And Natalie, you of all, you've had quite a bit on your plate too, haven't you?
Yes, good morning to all. And it's really interesting to listen to my colleagues whilst we're speaking. I made some notes before we started, and like all the best laid plans of mice and men, having heard a couple of the comments before, I've now sort of had to rethink some of the things that I was going to say. So I'm going to start off with some of the comments that were made by Ollie. I think he summed up the situation quite well in terms of some of the actions which have been taken by ILO and IMO and some flag states. Likewise, I think Justyna has explained the position as far as the Commission is concerned. But I'd like to look at the situation from the ship owners and the seafarers' perspective, if I possibly can. And when the crisis started, way back in January last year, we were approached by a couple of shipping companies who had business in China, who are concerned by this new virus that nobody really understood and the implications. And ICS was asked if we could try to put some medical guidance together. So we produced our first COVID-19 medical guidance document. We're now on guidance document number 4, which was released last month. So it just shows how much information and changes have had to be made during the course of the pandemic as it's increased. The situations, different things have come up like vaccinations, testing, issues with regard to seafarers getting medical care for other things apart from COVID during the crisis, and access to dental care, problems with seafarers being able to get prescriptions. So that's one of the immediate pieces of work that we started on. We also got involved then in producing the industry driven protocols on safe crew changes, which were then introduced as the IMO protocols and ratified through the MSC committee. Those have now been modified twice as well to take into account testing and subsequently vaccination. But that was driven by a cross-industry working group, which was chaired by ICS. We've done extensive lobbying with our partners in the ITF and with other agencies of the UN, ILO, IMO, within the EU with our contacts in EXA, also with WHO to a certain extent. But I have to say part of the problem is there doesn't appear to be sufficient power at a UN level to be able to get states to meet their obligations. And this has been our biggest challenge. So the agencies may well put out suggestions. We may well pass resolutions. Even we've had the first industry level resolution at the UN General Council, but that still has not made states actually honour their obligations. And it's beginning to, from a ship owner's perspective, to look as if we're meant to meet our obligations, which we try to do, and that states feel that somehow they've got a power to abrogate themselves from their own responsibilities, which is extremely frustrating. And I think if this continues, I think a lot of ship owners will ask, well, why should we bother to adhere to rules when states who don't seem to take them seriously are allowed to get away with it? And I think that's not good for any international rule-making procedure. So I would ask the states who are on this call to really think about that. The second thing I would say is that the MLC itself is currently now ratified by 98 states. And if you compare that to the other UN IMO pillar conventions, they're ratified by about 150 states, which means that we have a deficit of 52 states who've not ratified the MLC. And a lot of the problems, including the abandonments, which Ollie referred to, come on board from vessels which are not covered under the scope of the MLC. So whilst we have an international regime, we have to have 100% of the shipping industry tied up into that regime in order to make it watertight. The next thing I'd like to say is that yes, it's true that some flag states have met some of their obligations, but I have to say there's also been situations when flag states have not met their obligations. And one such example was with a big cruise ship, which ultimately was allowed to let seafarers transition in Panama when it had been declined to be able to let the seafarers have crew changes, including in the country, a flag state in which they were registered, because for fear of locals that they might get COVID when there was no basis for thinking that that would be the case. And I think that's a real concern to us. You know, flag states seem to be happy to take money to register vessels, but when it comes down to honouring their responsibilities for which they're being paid, they seem to shrink out of that responsibility rather quickly. Likewise, port states also have responsibilities under the MLC to facilitate movement, to provide port medical care access, to repatriate bodies back to the home country if necessary, to provide dental care to seafarers who are in need, to name but a few. And I think most people on the call will know of situations in all those cases where that's not been honoured. It's also been very difficult to get the port states to be helpful in situations of abandonment, which have arisen particularly during the crisis. And I was horrified to see last week that we've another 12 cases were reported to the IMO last week of abandonment. And whilst I accept it's shipping companies who are potentially abandoning the seafarers, the problem is that there should be proper obligations on the states under the IMO and ILO guidelines for those states to intervene where such a company has actually gone out of business, and it doesn't appear that the states are honouring their responsibilities in that regard. So just a few points for me to start getting you to think about it. If you'd like to look at any of the ICS COVID materials that we've produced, and there are a number of them, I will post up in the chat room after this the website where you can get those materials from, and we will continue to produce more guidance material as the situation progresses, because I think, unfortunately, the reality is that we are going to be in this position to a certain extent, at least for the next 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalie. And I can only support your last paragraph there on number of documents you have posted on your website. They are really of valuable help to us when we are looking into how we can provide best practices on a number of those items you mentioned. So, and Peter, when we go to you, I think you really have the operational shoes on this challenge on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, Shirley, thank you, Torbjorn. Let me be the one to bring some hopeful news. We are still doing crew changes, and we're doing a lot of crew changes. It's complicated, but it's doable. Here, luckily in Northern Europe, where we have the ports of Antwerp, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, Hamburg, we are still able to do a lot of crew changes. Yes, the times has been changed. It all started somewhere around, I think, February last year, then we already saw that the number of crew changes was going down because of the pandemic in China, and all ship owners and managements were not very keen to change their crew because they didn't know what was going on. And then there were no flights, so you couldn't do any crew changes anymore. Due to this, all people had to stay on board with all the consequences we are facing now. At this moment, things are much better. The challenges are not the crew change itself in the ports, but the challenges are getting the right flights, dealing with authorities. For instance, the visas could be a problem because embassies are sometimes closed in the countries where they should apply for visas. For instance, India. But if people can get their visa and they can get a flight, they are able to come in here to Northern Europe. If you want to do a crew change here, because everything has changed, of course, it's for a seafarer very complicated to come to Northern Europe. Most the times to travel is much longer because there are not that many connecting flights. He has to be tested, I think, 4 or 5 times sometimes. And when he gets into the country in Northern Europe with a Schengen visa, sometimes he has to be quarantined for a week or 2, and that's all plannable when you're talking about, let's say, container vessels. But for the oil tank, the tanker, and the bulker division, the tramping vessels, and the vessels who are on spot, it's much difficult. Because you're not sure when the vessel is coming. So people have to stay a long time in the hotels. But on the other hand, it's all doable. The next challenge we are facing now is the vaccination of the seafarer. For instance, the Dutch government has said to that for Dutch flagged vessels and Dutch owned vessels, the personnel could be vaccinated. Well, that's a very good thing, but there are only 15,000 seafarers in this region here. So what to do about the other 35,000 which has to be vaccinated? Well, you have to fly them in because we can't fly the vaccine to the countries. That has to be done here in the Netherlands. So we are facing a lot of challenges at this moment, and it's not over. I think that PCR testing and IgM testing will continue. So everyone who is taking a flight, whether he's vaccinated or not, should be tested, and that is already here in this region a complicated thing. I am very happy that we can do the crew change here in Northern Europe, and I'm very aware that the situation in Asia and Southern America, for instance, is quite different than it is here. And so we only see a small scope of what's happening in the world. But we are very happy to do the crew changes here in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. And I think that pretty much draws a light cloud over Europe, and then we have it a bit more dark elsewhere around the globe. So, Mohamed, from your point of view, in the Gulf, what's your assessment on the heavy times we are in?
Thank you, Torbjorn. If I would like to summarize it as a ship owner and operator for a large fleet, I can tell you that the main challenge that we are facing is actually that the whole issue is left to the individual governments and how they are handling the whole pandemic, and how they are actually facilitating the seafarer crew changes. Now, from the very beginning, in ADNOC, we have taken the responsibility in order not to leave it to our dependency on the governments and how they are actually dictating it. I mean, we are very blessed here in UAE that, like in Europe, we were the first countries in in Asia to facilitate crew changes from the early stage of the pandemic. We put the right, regulation in place, and I believe, UAE became a major crew change hub, during this pandemic, and it still continues to be. We have, also because we have an ocean-going fleet, and not all of them are coming to UAE all the time. So we continue to chase crew changes by deviating vessels, and looking for opportunities where we can actually carry out crew changes. I would like also, to thank all the flag states who supported us throughout this pandemic, because all the certifications were actually getting expired, and they were all understanding and issuing the right exemptions, looking at our control measures in place. Like also to thank the classification societies who also supported us to ensure that the continuity of our operations and carrying out all the remote surveys during this pandemic. We were quite also lucky that we had the infrastructure in place in our vessels. Our vessels, they were all equipped with the right connectivity, so we were able immediately to implement the remote inspections and all the measures in place to run our vessels safely, and to have a continuous communication with our seafarers. That was quite crucial, especially when you look at the number of months they're being stranded over their tour of duty, and they needed, the head office to communicate with them on daily basis, weekly basis, and we have been very much involved in this. Even our CEO himself, he has like a weekly schedule where he's meeting our seafarers to address them and to assure them and to let them know that we continuously support them. We tried our best, but again, there is a limitation to what we can do. If the governments do not, provide an opportunity to carry out crew change, that's beyond our control. And we even faced situations where we couldn't even get our crew to, medivacs, when they were required. And we had to really talk to our embassy in these countries to facilitate these kind of arrangement, and they were done on an exceptional basis. But because being a government company, we can pull these strings. Nevertheless, I believe many operators had suffered during these times. Our current state, our coastal fleet, and this is the majority of our fleet, because we operate a large fleet of marine service and offshore vessels, they are 100% vaccinated. So that all our seafarers here in UAE, they are 100%, because in UAE we consider the seafarers are actually the front line, and they are given priority. In our ocean-going fleet, we are progressing in terms of vaccinations as much as we can do, as we have a dependency on their home countries, as well as when our vessels call UAE, and we're trying to administer it when our vessels actually call UAE to provide this vaccination to them as far as we can. Overall, I think many stakeholders they tried very hard. They understand the industry, they understand the significance of the seafarers, and they tried very hard. But still, we see there is lack of understanding from many governments that they really need to step up and to understand that this pandemic is not going to end up like they thought within a year. It's continuing and may continue for a few years longer. And the situation with the seafarers it will affect the overall global economy. And we cannot just continue the way we are doing. We need to do something different, and they need to really provide the opportunity to carry out crew changes. We don't want to bring risk to their countries, for sure, but with the right mitigation measures in place, with the right controls, I think this can be done. And there are so many examples in many countries in Europe and in Asia. We have been successful with this. So this is, there's something I would like, honestly, for IMO to really take it seriously and take it forward, because so far, I believe, issuing guidance and being, focal from in various events, it's not really, making the right impact. And we hope to see a change in the way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. And me, on a personal note, I'm very glad you're open, because Fujairah for us is a very vital hub when it comes to crew changes. So I'm very happy we've managed to do that. I would like to present one thing to you, Ollie, because one thing Mohamed mentioned and also Peter is medevacs, people signing off. And in these days, it's been easier to signing people off than signing people on. So has Bahamas, as a flag state, seen an increase in number of exemptions coming from operators and owners in going from one port to another over a long period without having maybe the right senior management level engineer on board? Have you seen a significant raise in that due to the restrictions on travel?
Yes, we saw a significant increase in that, specifically at the start of the pandemic and all the way through to about March this year, actually. But there is a decreasing trend now, and they're not so frequent anymore. And we've also seen port state, they refuse to offer, senior level officers to get on board ships, but they allow them to travel out of the country, and then they will not allow the ship to sail until the ship is fully manned, which is totally against all conventions. And that is very, very frustrating indeed for the owners, but definitely also for the flag states, because we are dealing in line with international conventions, which everybody signs up to. Thank you. Did that answer your question?
That it did. Natalie, I have a question to you related to the MLC. And we do know, we were very happy when the MLC came into play and it was ratified, and we knew that, we could be on the safe side of treating our people properly. And then we have so many cases where the completely opposite is actually taking place. And do you see any hopes in an overarching national umbrella being able to impose any MLC actions? I mean, when we have flagged vessels coming to countries who have ratified the MLC, do we have cases where actually the country doing the port state control has actually gone in and intervened and said, you know what, you're not leaving here until you have made your dues?
Okay, the simple answer to that is it very much depends on the country concerned. And I think it's fair to say ICS was originally the instigator of the concept of having the MLC, and we then approached the unions because we'd, up to that point, you'll recall, we had over 60 different instruments, some of which were well ratified and some of which were poorly ratified across countries. And there really wasn't a regime in force to potentially actually be able to hold parties to account. And I go back to my original point, and that is that holding people to account is not just a question of holding ship owners to account, it's holding everybody to account who's party to that convention. And certainly what we've experienced is that since the pandemic started, a lot of states, for one reason or another, and sometimes with the best interests of their own nationals at heart, for fear of potentially having people coming in who might spread contagion in their country, have not honoured their MLC obligations, which is extremely frustrating to us. So it's not just a question of the ship owners not doing what they're supposed to be doing or the seafarers not doing. It's actually the people who ratify the convention are the states themselves, and those states take on obligations and responsibilities, as is shown in the Bahamas slide, which is currently on screen. And what's clearly happening is that there are other ministries in the countries that have ratified the conventions who are trumping the maritime ministries in saying that they can't fulfill their obligations. And when we've discussed this at the IMO and the ILO and the WHO level, what becomes clear is that there are competing and conflicting international rules in other spheres, which seem to make it very difficult to know which laws countries are signed up to have precedence and which don't. And I think until the big lesson learned, I think that we've come out from this is that there needs to be one overarching fundamental principled convention which makes it absolutely clear who is responsible for what in a pandemic and what needs to be happening. And if we don't get this, we won't get the free trade that we need. And that could have severe implications on, I think, making future pandemics worse if we can't actually facilitate trade. So it's all about the governments themselves getting their own house in order. And also, if we can do that, and if more countries ratify the convention, we continue to move towards a level playing field, and hopefully that will help as well. But at the end of the day, a convention is only as good as the states who actually fulfill their obligations and responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. A question to the entire panel, and just raise your hand if you want to respond to that. One thing Peter was speaking about was visa challenges, and on a personal note, we see embassies closing down, visas not being issued, countries identifying countries at red flag due to the high concentration per 100,000 or per million citizens. Has there been any discussions? I'm thinking in the European Commission or in the flag state on, is removing visas on sailors as critical personnel, has it at all been looked upon? Could that be something we would have to look into the future to provide smooth transfer of sailors? Yes, Peter?
I don't think anyone has looked into it because authorities are very strict concerning visas. And there are also many differences between countries. We have one Schengen area here, but countries are doing their own thing. Denmark is different than the Netherlands. The Netherlands is different than France, and France is different than Germany, for instance. But it could be done. Everyone has a Siemens book, and I think it's about 15 to 20 years ago, one could travel on a Siemens book. I don't think that it's gonna happen, but I think it should be looked into.
Thank you, Peter. Ollie, you definitely had an opinion on this one.
Yes, indeed, and there's a hot topic we are discussing internally in the BMA at the moment. And as Peter said, traveling on Siemens book is a solution we are looking at, and we have met several port states who are looking at the same thing, that they require, you know, on Bahamas flag units, a Bahamas Siemens book on board, and we are trying to accommodate that in the best possible way. And I believe, my personal opinion is that it should be raised at international level in both IMO and ILO. Thank you.
Yes. Mohamed, in the Emirates, we always have these upon arrival, if I'm not mistaken, and I know it's been so busy down there that we haven't we've actually seen that, you know, numbers coming in and numbers planned out actually gives us some limitations. Any thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, for the seafarers, I think there has been special arrangement, especially the ocean-going vessels, whereby, you know, you can actually get you know, a 96-hour visa, and then this will allow this crew change to take place without having any quarantine while coming inside the UAE. Nevertheless, for the coastal vessels, it has been, you know, quite more challenging, because there is, you know, more requirement for vessels that they are trading coastally, because then you need to have a resident visa on these vessels. And I think there has been, you know, at the early stage, quite many complications to get people back in the country from the countries that they are, you know, flagged as red countries. But it has, I believe, improved so far, and it's more manageable. But the important point is about ocean-going vessels. I think it's much more flexible.
And Justyna, then to follow up on what Peter said, when you're sitting in the European Commission, there are a lot of considerations that need to be taken into account with all countries represented. How do you feel this has been tackled?
From the perspective of the European Commission, especially with the service which is not responsible for traveling into the EU, I can speak only from my personal perspective, which is not the position of the Commission. The first thing is that for doing anything, we need to have an agreement from the member states, because this is the prerogative. We have a Schengen code, but everything is in the hands of member states. And what has been said is there are very different approaches to that. So first, and the second, what came into my mind is that before we do anything, we need to have country be ratifying the 185 convention for seafarers identity cards, which are the new one, and which prevent as much as possible from fraudulent practices, and ensuring the maximum of safety and security for countries and the citizens.
Thank you very much. Well, we're we're closing our time here. So first, I would like to thank all 5 of you for contributing. Then I think all 6 of us agree that we're definitely not finished with COVID, and it's going to be with us for a long time. But and who sees where we end up? The vaccination process, I think, is quite vital. That's in the next session now. I think some of the challenges for us with vaccination is voluntarily or imposed, and we do have human rights in this. And then the question is, how do we fix that? Thank you very much.